The sound of metal screaming under pressure still vibrated in his ears. Elias sat up, chest heaving. The image of the bridge snapping in half against a gray, rain-slicked sky burned into his vision. He gripped the edge of his bed, waiting for the phantom roar of collapsing concrete to fade. Outside, the chrome spires of Neo-Veridian caught the first light of dawn. He pulled up the live feed of the bridge. It stood solid, motionless, perfectly intact. He exhaled, but the tension in his neck did not break. Across the city, millions were waking to the same jagged, terrifying fragments of a future that had not yet arrived. Elias sat at his terminal, fingers hovering over the glass. He opened the central neural logs. The data scrolled by in a blur of synchronized brainwave patterns. Every citizen was dreaming the same timeline, each from a different vantage point, like pieces of a broken mirror. He tapped a key, isolating the patterns. The logic was inescapable. The city was not just dreaming, it was anticipating its own end. He stared at the monitor, watching the pulse of a million sleeping minds, all locked into the same countdown. The first proof of the dream arrived at noon. A transport hover car swerved violently on the transit line, clipped the barrier, and disintegrated in a shower of sparks, a perfect, gruesome echo of a woman's waking nightmare. Elias did not wait. He shoved back his chair and ran for the sublevels. His boots hammered against the sterile floor, the sound echoing through the empty corridors of the Kronos Institute. He reached the containment chamber and stopped. The quantum core hung in the center of the room, a sphere of liquid light. It pulsed with a frequency that vibrated against his teeth and blurred his vision. He keyed into the haptic interface, his fingers dancing across the shifting light. A diagnostic bar filled the screen, turning from yellow to a jagged, warning red. Reactor 7. A critical leak in the cooling manifold. The temperature was climbing, bypassing every safety threshold. He stared at the readout, the numbers ticking upward with lethal precision. Total thermal collapse was locked for sunset. The city would not just fail, it would be vaporized. He gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles turning white, as the room around him began to hum with the heat of the impending explosion.
Elias slammed his hand onto the broadcast key, pushing the raw diagnostic data to every public terminal in Neo-Veridian.
The warning flashed across billboards, transit screens, and personal devices. The city stopped. Millions of eyes scanned the red lines of the reactor failure. Slowly, the fragments of their dreams began to lock into place. One man on the west side remembered the sequence for the plasma vents. A technician in the northern sector recalled the location of a hidden bypass valve. They were no longer victims of their visions. They were architects of the solution. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, bleeding orange across the chrome towers, the city surged. Citizens flooded the streets in a choreographed wave. They worked in silence, overriding manual locks and shunting power grids with the precision of a single organism. The heat from the core began to radiate through the ventilation shafts, but the movement only accelerated. Every street corner became a site of frantic, coordinated repair. Elias watched the feedback loop on his monitor as thousands of connections stabilized. The city was racing against its own destruction, turning the terror of their nightmares into the blueprints for their survival.
Elias lunged into the core chamber. The air was a physical weight, thick with ionized ozone and a heat that blistered his skin. Sparks erupted from the ceiling like dying stars, showering the floor in white-hot debris. He scrambled toward the central console, his boots crunching over melting conduits. The quantum core was a blinding, screaming sun, vibrating with such intensity that the floor plates began to warp beneath him. He glanced at a wall monitor. A child played with a holographic ball, oblivious to the impending vaporizing blast. Elias reached the manual override lever. The metal burned his palm, but he did not let go. He braced his feet, his muscles locking, and yanked the lever down with everything he had. The core shrieked a high, metallic howl that shattered the surrounding glass. A blinding flash of violet light flooded the room,
turning the world into a negative image. Then the hum vanished. The shaking stopped. The light died instantly, leaving only the smell of charred plastic and the heavy, absolute silence of a dead machine. The reactor was cold. The future had stopped mid-breath. The next morning, Neo-Veridian woke up to a blank slate. The air was clear, stripped of the static that had defined the city for months. There were no nightmares to recall, no pre-written scripts to follow, and no shared visions haunting the waking hours. Elias stepped out onto his balcony, the cool metal railing grounding him against the morning breeze. Below, the streets were alive with mundane noise. A vendor 3 levels down fumbled with a crate, and a dozen oranges tumbled to the pavement with a sharp,
echoing clatter. A passerby jumped at the sudden noise, looked at the spilled fruit, and laughed.
It was a genuine, startled reaction to an unscripted event. Elias leaned over the edge, watching the crowd weave through the plaza. People moved without the rigid, synchronized purpose of the previous night. They walked in random patterns, distracted by the sun, by the wind, and by each other. He felt the weight of the moment settling in his chest. He did not know what the next hour held, or where the day would lead. For the first time in his life, he was not looking at a projection of what was to come. He was simply living in the present, facing a future that was entirely, terrifyingly unwritten.